Let's see, if something costs less, but people are happier with it, that sounds like something to look into, and that's MediShare. Maybe you've heard switching to MediShare to pay for healthcare can save the typical family $500 a month, and that's huge, but it's also true that people are way more satisfied after making the switch, too. The customer satisfaction rate for MediShare is double that of the typical health insurance plan. Double. MediShare works. It's been around for more than a quarter century, and members have shared more than $3 billion of each other's bills. People love having telehealth and a huge nationwide PPO network. So, yeah, you can save a ton and like it better. Imagine being happy with how you're taking care of your health care. So if you're self-employed or part of the gig economy, or you just want a plan you're happy with, you can call right now and get a price within 2 minutes. A very, very smart use of 2 minutes. Here's the number you need. 833-32-BIBLE. That's 833-32-BIBLE. 833-32-BIBLE.
I both thrived there, but also had another epiphany, which is I don't think I want to spend my life in, as much as I love the classroom. I was a Sunday school teacher in college. I come from a family of teachers, ministers, etc. So I said, I just don't think this is right, but I've always been drawn to the law, and the sort of capstone of that thinking and praying process was when I had a course which was required of all graduate students in constitutional law, and that was it. I just fell in love and went to law school.
This is CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, from the producers of Keep the Faith. I'm David Sams. Ken Starr, one of the great legal minds in American history, is with me today. This is one of the greatest attorneys ever. He has just an unbelievable background. And of course, he's the guy that went after, or his investigation led to the impeachment of President Bill Clinton back in the day. He is responsible for, remember the Starr report, that big, thick book that came out. That was the investigation. Remember Whitewater and Monica Lewinsky and all that. Now I know I'm showing my age now, but those of you who don't remember that, I'm sure you remember the impeachment of Donald J. Trump. And it was Trump's impeachment that once again called on Ken Starr, but this time he defended the president. So it's amazing. It's amazing, his history and his background and his stories, and he's going to share some of those with you. And it's pretty cool having him here. He has a new book out that is a fascinating read. It's called Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. And you've got to pick that up, and he's going to talk about that. But I could not wait to have him on because Ken Starr was once the dean of the Pepperdine Law School, and I'm so proud of that because my daughter just recently graduated from Pepperdine with, get this, not one, not two, but 3 degrees. Pretty cool. I know I'm having a proud papa moment, but I had to get that in there. I did this interview just days before that graduation, so it really resonated with me, and I had a great time with Ken. He was such a great guest, and I want to get right to it right now and share that with you because it is a lot of fun. Here we go, Ken Starr. Well, good morning. How are you?
I'm great, David. Thank you so much. I'm doing well. Many blessings to you, and thank you again for your kindness and extending the invitation.
Well, my daughter was all excited that I'm interviewing you today. She's graduating from Pepperdine with 3 degrees. Yeah.
Well, that's really good news.
Hey, we also have a mutual friend, Tom Gehring.
Oh, great, of course.
Yeah.
Very, very. Blessed be the ties that bind.
Yeah, Tom was, I was in Hollywood for many years producing, and Tom was my attorney for many, many years now, just a good friend. So I know you've done some work with him when you were over there at Pepperdine. Right,
exactly. Yeah, well, tell Tommy he's overdue in reaching out to me, but that makes 2 of us.
He threatened 10 years ago. I moved to Nashville 10 years ago. I decided to get out of that crazy place out there, and he threatened to move here with me. And he's still threatening, and I said, "Hey man, you missed out. The real estate here in Nashville is now as much as it is in California." It's just crazy.
Oh,
Hey,
what a shame.
yeah, I know. Hey, I wanted to start out by just kind of, I just want to just sort of introduce you to our listeners. Just tell us who the real Ken Starr is, not the mythical character we all grew up hearing about.
Oh, no. He's a dangerous fellow.
So tell me about the real Ken Starr.
Oh, well, I was born in Texas, two Texans, so I'm back home. We've been living in Texas, my native state, for the last 10 years. So I was born and raised in Texas, grew up in San Antonio, born in North Texas, but I call San Antonio my hometown. And I grew up in a very godly household. My father was a minister, and to make ends meet, he was also a licensed barber. So he plied that trade as necessary. Mm-hmm. To keep food on the table and so forth. It was a long time ago.
And by the way, we have that in common. We're both PKs, and my dad was also a Church of Christ minister. So,
how sweet.
I guess that put a little bit of a rebel in us, being PKs.
Yeah. PK. Unlike MKs, missionary kids, preachers' kids, the sheriff knows who they are. Let's just put it that way. And so we have a sweet Tennessee connection. And my late father went to Freed Hardeman in Henderson, Tennessee, on a Future Preachers scholarship, a long time ago. I've been an orphan for about 15 years now. So we grew up being in church a lot. I preached my first sermon at the age of 12. I went consistent with the Churches of Christ tradition and a cappella music, which I love, to song leaders school shortly after my voice changed. So I guess around 13 or whatever. So I know how to lead. Blessed be the ties that, and I can wave my hands and that. It's just 3/4, 4/4. And so I went off to Harding University, then Harding College in Searcy, Arkansas. It was a Churches of Christ affiliated school. My older brother was teaching there at the time. And I was not kicked out of Harding, contrary to nasty rumors. But I did have a heart-to-heart talk with the president of the college, a great man, Clifton Gaines, who recently departed from this life. And I had, as the freshman editor of the newspaper, written a harshly critical editorial of the administration. And it essentially was, you need to be pouring your limited resources into building the faculty rather than capital projects. So I got an earful from Dr. Gaines. And as I was it was not my due process hearing. He wasn't kicking me out of school. But it was just clear to me that I needed to do what my high school counselor back in San Antonio had said, which is you need to go to Washington, D.C. So I transferred. We had a very dear friend through church circles who was on the faculty at American University, but he said, I would advise Ken, who's a friend of my parents, Ken to go to George Washington. And so I did. And that was a wonderful, informative experience, not just because of the sweet connections I made and great guidance I had from the professors, but I was able to work and needed to work to help put my way through college on Capitol Hill. And that was one of those, you look back, what were important milestones in life's journey. And being able as a youngster, not old enough to vote at the time, to work really at the right hand of Congressman Robert Price, now deceased, who was a conservative Republican from Texas. And that was an epiphany kind of enterprise for me. I was a great admirer in high school of President Kennedy. Not so great of LBJ. My family just did not have, what should I say, a lot of sense of affinity for President Johnson. But it was really those sessions, informal. I would drive my congressman, or he would drive to Dulles Airport from the Longworth House office buildings. And on that long drive, he would fly home and I would drive his car back to the garage. So he trusted me with his car. I never got into an accident or a ticket. So I was very proud of that. But I just look back with such fondness, but also a sense of I was being formed in terms of a political outlook and so forth. And he was a sagebrush rebellion, limited government kind of person, as you might think, from the panhandle of Texas, which is where his district was from, his district at the time. My GW professors said, as we say in the South, took a shine to me and got me a wonderful fellowship and a PhD program at Brown University, great Baptist University, Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And I both thrived there, but also had another epiphany, which is I don't think I want to spend my life in, as much as I love the classroom. I was a Sunday school teacher in college. I taught the high school class when I was in college at 16th and Decatur Church of Christ in Washington, D.C. And I love teaching. I come from a family of teachers, ministers, et cetera. So I said, I just don't think this is right. But I've always been drawn to the law, and the sort of capstone of that thinking and praying process was when I had a course which was required of all graduate students in constitutional law, taught basically to undergrads, basically pre-law people. And that was it. I just fell in love and went to law school, was privileged and blessed to get a scholarship at the Duke Law School in Durham, North Carolina. So I returned south of Mason-Dixon, so to speak, and really thrived in law school. So that's the sort of educational background and journey. And I'm just very thankful that even though my family was of modest means, always had to work my way through college and so forth, find my own way, with financial support from the family. I'm really so grateful that not only was there no silver spoon, but the treasure that was talked about was treasure in heaven.
You bring up something that I want to go into a little bit, the epiphanies you had throughout your early years and how those moments redefined who you were to become. It seems like today that, kids have so much pressure on them. I mean, I know my daughters, they got to have it figured out in about 10 minutes or they're stressing out, Yeah. You kind of evolved over a period of time. How do you think things have changed for kids today versus back in those days? What can we do to just let kids figure it out as opposed to trying to, have them get it all together by the time they're 15?
Too much pressure, too much information, and especially information and material that's not good and may even be just quite negative. And I never heard of, they may have existed, but kids considering suicide, what? No one would do that. So in retrospect, obviously we were sheltered, and television. And I must say, if I had one criticism looking back in my upbringing, we watched a lot of television. And one of the things, by the way, that even though I'm a Fox News contributor, I swore off all television, save for Baylor basketball, the exception that proves the rule for Lent. And I must say, I've been happier, more at peace. I think we lose sight of the amount of time that our children and grandchildren now spend on social media and so forth, and many of the influences are quite baleful and negative. So what do we need to do? Gosh, get the doggone television out of the house, disarm it, or have it for limited occasions. And I frankly don't know how to govern the use of social media. I leave that to experts, and I know there's an enormous amount of parental and grandparent, but more parental as it should be, guidance in terms of the use of social media. Get the kids off. I know they've got to be able to communicate with friends. It's very important. They cannot live in total social isolation, and we weren't meant to, right? The whole idea of the church, the ecclesia, is that we come together in community, and we can't really deprive young people, I think rightly, of their friendships. And my word, and during the pandemic, what choice did they have, right, other than to be communicating remotely? So, but I'm sure there are best practices out there, but I know one thing, I'm no expert. In fact, I'm not even well informed on how to control social media. Controlling television is within, right? There should not be a television in every child's room and so forth. Just say no to that. And another thing that I think is less use than we used to is reading together, right? Reading, we're better together. I heard a sermon series recently on that. We're better together, and so too with reading. And some of my fondest memories and sweetest memories looking back is reading to the children, preferably one child at a time. And that's just precious. And the power of story and scriptures and Bible stories and so forth. A final thing, memorization. I don't think that is de rigueur these days in most classrooms. It is in classical schools and Christian schools. As I travel around the country, I was just in Portland, Oregon, at George Fox University, then talking with the students, obviously, but then also talking to parents and professors and so forth. And many of the children, I think, who then go, whether they're homeschoolers or just grew up in a Bible-believing household, a Bible-honoring household, they've committed of the scriptures, life passages to heart. That, again, is being lost in what I fear is an age of biblical illiteracy, and then we'll get into constitutional illiteracy later, I'm sure, in our talk.
Yeah. And, I just have to ask you, if looking back, if you knew back then what you know now, what advice would you give yourself when you were 15?
I would say, to draw from Malcolm Muggeridge, Chronicles of Wasted Time, and Bernard Shaw, Youth is Wasted on the Young. Be less self-conscious, be less focused on peers and so forth. Try to create in yourself, by God's grace, a more integrated personality and so forth, marching to the beat of a hired drummer, and just spend less time worrying about, hey, what do my friends think of me, and am I cool, and so forth. Interestingly enough, I went to a large public high school in San Antonio, and I was president of the class, junior class, and then I got elected president of the senior class, which I gather was unusual in terms of the tradition, to go in and do something else. And one of the reasons it wasn't a plank in my platform is I helped plan the senior prom. That was one of the duties, but I didn't attend out of respect to my parents. I mean, it was a very traditional, conservative household, and it was just frowned upon. And so one of the cool kids, I wasn't a cool kid, one of the cool kids in the class said, "Hey, Starr, you didn't come to the prom, and I understand you were doing this out of honor thy father and mother. You didn't put it in those ways." He said, "That's amazing." Right? It's sort of out of his frame of reference, but instead of saying, "You were so weird," he said, that was just viewed as, so it was a good deed that for once did not go unpunished or persecuted.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I was just uncomfortable. And I will admit, I did some things behind my parents' back, including some of those plans, but I wanted to shield them because I knew they would not approve.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it was my duty, my solemn responsibility. So I would just say, be Polonius to Laertes, very, very secular advice, but I think it's got great wisdom.
Mm-hmm,
To thine own self be true, but then try to be guided by nobler aspirations than how am I doing on the popularity front. Easy to say, hard to do when you're a kid.
Yeah. I've just got to ask one question before we get to the book, and that is because I get this chance. As an independent counsel in the 90s, you were responsible for what led to the impeachment of President Clinton, and later you defended President Trump during his impeachment ordeal. Whether you're taking on a president or defending a president, the most powerful guy in the world, that's got to do some funky things to your brain. I mean, who would have ever thought when you were 15?
Admiral Stockdale, who am I and where am I and why am I here? A name from the past. Yeah. Well, happily, I was grounded in faith, family, and friends. So the first duty with respect to President Clinton was exactly that. It was the duty. With respect to President Trump in impeachment 1.0, it was a call to service. I accepted no compensation nor reimbursement for expenses. And I did that because I wanted it to be pure in the economic financial sense, that I was doing what I was doing out of a sense of duty called by the president or the president's counsel to jump in and assist on that. But with respect to both experiences, I looked at the experiences through both a biblical lens, but even more day to day through a constitutional and legal lens. And that was very helpful. When I put on my glasses, so to speak, figuratively speaking, I was seeing the Constitution, the framework of liberty, the separation of powers, the dangers of Congress stepping into and abusing its power, including the power of impeachment, which I know was bandied about during the Clinton years, but I think was quite painfully, to me, obvious as a citizen and not as a retained counsel with respect to President Trump and Trump 1.0. 2.0 is a tougher call because I do not approve, who would, of the events of January 6th. But I don't think that the impeachment itself, and I spoke out as a Fox News commentator against the article. I thought the article was ill-founded, and the rush to judgment, et cetera. I did not think that the Senate had the power to try. It was my view. It was by no means a majority view, that's for sure, within the legal academy. But I did not think that the United States Senate had the constitutional power to try an individual who had already left office.
Do you ever run into Bill Clinton?
No, I never have. On several occasions, although it's not long ago, someone of influence would come to me and said, it would be great if there could be reconciliation. That's the title of one of my chapters in my book. And I said, anytime, anywhere. But nothing came of it.
Hey, let's talk about your book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty, which is a fascinating read. And you state right there in the beginning that religious liberty is in crisis. Though its crisis was not created by a global pandemic, it has been exposed by it. What do you mean by that?
Governmental power, the exercise of governmental power. And now we see it's not simply Washington, D.C. that has power. Our governors have power, enormous powers. And then in most states, mayors have enormous powers. Think of Mayor de Blasio in New York. And so I think that the pandemic has put in bold relief that which has always been present, which is government is a potential exerciser of power in a way that, by definition, erodes or eliminates liberty. And we're now seeing that in a highly secular age with respect to the pressures, such as church closings ordered by the governor, right? Which is extraordinary. Really, you're going to close the church, forbid services, or permit services only on this incredibly restricted basis that seems almost irrational on its face. Didn't happen everywhere, right? And even where it happened in, shall I say, less liberty-denying jurisdictions, like my native Texas, where we live, still there was a sense of, this is very temporary, we're going to move out of this. Whereas in some of the largest states, New York and California being the obvious examples, the litigation continues over whether the governor or the mayor has the power month after month after month to essentially forbid meaningful religious services. That put the whole issue in sharp relief. The next thing I would say is, at a national level, the conversation is underway. The debate is getting very, very hot, and it should, on the so-called Equality Act that has passed the House of Representatives by a deeply divided vote. Only 3 Republicans, but 3 Republicans joined it. I believe every single Democrat voted in favor of the Equality Act, which by its terms, would repeal, for purposes of Title 7 for the entire 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is a venerable statute. God bless that Congress that in the midst of the civil rights movement in this country passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, a wonderful, wonderful, remedial, much needed statute. But now that statute is being amended to expand the protected classes, and at the same time to say that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1994, which I hope we'll talk about, is essentially repealed for purposes of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This is astonishingly broad. So it's a national, I believe, assault on fundamental religious liberties.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what we're paying for now, living here in Tennessee, is, oh my gosh, everybody's moving here from California. I know you're experiencing the same thing there in Texas, and I hope they don't bring their politics with them, because
they are. Many are, and that's the cruel irony. In fact, during the 2018 midterm elections, I saw these signs in Texas for a particular candidate, and I asked a then sitting member of Congress from Texas, who's I won't mention his name, there's no secret, Jeb Hensterling, who at the time was the chair of the House Finance Committee, and he decided to step down. He was ready, kids getting older, college bills coming due, and so forth. And I said, Mr. Chairman, what's happening? And we live in Waco, the Baylor connection, but in Dallas, in these very wealthy parts of Dallas, there are no signs for the Republican candidate, and only signs for the Democrat. And there are a lot of them. And this is a sea change. And he said people are moving into the state, and they're bringing their politics with them.
I want to go under the hood a little bit in regards to the book, since it is such a weird time and we're going through this pandemic and hopefully coming out on the other end of it, at least in Texas and Florida and Tennessee we are.
Yes.
Let's talk about the rights we have as Americans as it relates to our religious freedoms, what we should be fighting for, what we have a right to fight for, and what we have a chance to win.
Right. I think part of the good news of this book, and the book, by the way, was written, and I had 2 editors, one British and then one a fellow lawyer, but it was written so that it would be accessible to a layperson. It's not written for lawyers. I think lawyers can benefit from it. I hope they will. And I'm confident that they will, if I may say so. But it's really written for laypersons who are concerned about the state of liberty in this country. And that obviously includes these days, for the reasons we've already described, religious liberty in America is in fact increasingly under assault. Religious liberty is always under tension, under pressures. There's nothing new about that, but the intensity and the breadth of the assault have increased dramatically. What this book does, though, it is a book of hope. issued of hope, but it's realistic hope as opposed to hope springs eternal in the human breast. And here are tools that individuals, if they choose to become, as we all become, autodidacts. We learn ourselves. How do we do that? We read, we reflect, we are prayerful, we continue study, and so forth. I hope that laypersons who care about religious liberty will read this book, and then they will be equipped not only to give a reason for the hope that is within them in terms of the baseline for America is liberty. Boom, full stop. That's the way it has been from the beginning of the Constitution. But it also gives them tools to engage in dialogue with their next door neighbor or someone who's very hostile, or just saying, I think Jack Phillips should have baked that cake, right, for the same-sex couple. I think that was really wrong on his part. Well, then if you read this book, you say, well, let me share with you a different perspective, and you may not agree with it, but it's called, the perspective I want to share is acts of conscience. Do you think that little children should be required to engage in a patriotic exercise, or should they? That was the Supreme Court held that, and I describe all this in the book. Do you think that the old order Amish should be required to send their children to high school when they believe sincerely that their way of life will be threatened if their children have to be educated in the public schools? And if the person says, yeah, kids should be required to engage in an act of conscience and so forth, a violation of their act of conscience, then there may just be an agreement to disagree. But overwhelmingly, the American people believe in the idea of conscience. The Constitution believes in it. And it took into account the fact that Quakers, the Friends, could not swear when they took an oath in court or to become officers, right, of the United States. Swear or affirm, taking all these into account. And conscientious objection has been part of the warp and woof of who we are as a free people, even before the Constitution, even during the Revolution. Each of the 13 original states fighting for independence recognized conscientious objectors. By the way, no conscientious objections under the Equality Act. That is why I believe, I'm going to use a harsh term here, the Equality Act, pending before Congress, represents a radical assault on our traditions. To do what? To say there shall be no discrimination whatsoever. Well, who's in favor of discrimination? Well, let me end this part of the conversation with this. Jack Phillips was serving everyone. He didn't say, what is your sexual orientation or gender identity as you're coming in the shop? And if he had, he would be fairly condemned, I believe, morally, but certainly under the laws of the United States, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. That would be wrong, but that was never his position. He will serve everyone, and he serves them with gladness of heart and in a loving way. What he cannot do in conscience, so there we are again, is to exercise his artistic powers, not to bake a cake, but to design the cake that reflects who the couple is or what the event is. He can't in conscience, and he's been asked to, celebrate a divorce. Free at last. I can't do that, he would say. I cannot, he would say, do a Halloween cake. I'll do an All Saints Day cake, or I would do a Halloween evening cake, but I can't do a Halloween cake because of his very, very sincere beliefs, acts of conscience. That's what's in danger in the United States, acts of conscience. This book helps one give an explanation to from a layperson to a layperson to a high schooler, talking about high school kids being under pressures or college kids being under pressure. This book was designed to give people the tools of reasoning. Come, as Isaiah said, come let us reason together, that we can reason together. And if you convince everyone, great. If you don't convince everyone, that's just the way the world is. It's a fallen world. But at least you'll have the tools of conversation, and all in 170 pages.
How do you balance, I get into these debates from time to time with with some of my conservative friends who, it's our way or the highway. And I get into this debate, and I remind them that what was it in the 1920s or 30s? If a woman walked into an LA County courtroom in black pants, she was jailed. 100 years ago, a little bit over 100 years ago, women couldn't vote. Obviously, we evolve. Okay, so what is fair to put into the evolve category versus the outrageous category? I mean, what's fair?
I think one thing that we can begin the conversation with is you and I both believe, I'm talking about the hypothetical neighbor, right?
Yeah.
Or the hostile person at the grocery store.
They're not so hypothetical, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. The real person in the grocery store, or the neighbor, the member of the club, or whatever. To say, I think there's some things you and I agree on, and that is fundamental human dignity. And we can talk about the basis for that. I, as a Christian, as a believer, here's the basis for that. But if you, my dear secular friend, you believe it just from a humanism perspective, that people are different, right? You don't experiment on people without their agreeing, right? You don't coerce people into doing those things that they don't want to do unless it's the most compelling kind of reason for it. That's part of our tradition. And the reason for that is what comes with human dignity is the idea that freedom is the baseline. And we should be able to agree on that. Mm-hmm. You should be able to decide who your spouse is, how many children you're going to have, where your children are going to go to school. Mm-hmm. Not if they're going to go to school, because the government, I agree, liberty can't mean I'm going to just keep my kids at home. And no, I'm not going to homeschool them. They're going to work in the fields, right? You said, no, of course. And that's why then I introduced the idea of ordered liberty. Liberty is the baseline, but at the same time, just as I use the example of speed limits, right? Your liberty to go buy a car, right? But you got to get the car license and so forth. This is ordered liberty. Mm-hmm. You can't go any speed that you want to, right? These everyday things, but liberty remains the baseline. And so, to bring it back to Jack's case, please allow him the liberty to act consistent with his sincerely held beliefs. Just as individuals, as I understand it, it's true, designers in New York refused to design an inaugural gown or gowns for Mrs. Trump, for the incoming First Lady of the United States 4.5 years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, does that bother you? No, they should refuse, right? And then the whatever the invective is, right, that comes out. Of course, they should have refused. Well, that's because you agree with them. But what about when you disagree, and it's based not on a political viewpoint, which they're free, welcome to freedom, but it's based on a religious category. And then here, my dear friend, is something that makes religious belief sacred in the United States. Mm-hmm, yes, sacred. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And this is prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Mm. When I remember during the 2016 campaign, Mrs. Clinton talked about freedom of worship. Oh, no. It's free exercise of religion. You went to the Yale Law School. You know that freedom to worship is simply part of the broad panoply of rights guaranteed and assured under the First Amendment. But it's the free exercise of religion. And that's what, to stay with the Jack Phillips example in the same-sex marriage cake celebration activity, that's exactly what he was engaging in. Freedom of conscience, freedom of the mind, as Robert Jackson, the great justice in his iconic opinion in the West Virginia school children case, where the little children could not, consistent with their beliefs, engage in a flag salute ceremony.
So how can we as Americans protect our rights of religious freedom, and how can we take a more active role in advancing the cause of liberty, and how can we get work through this crazy thing that's being thrown at us every day, this cancel culture thing that we're dealing with?
Well, the first thing, I honestly do believe, and I hope my book is helpful, but whatever the process is, we have to educate ourselves. We can't just say, I think and I believe. We have to be able to engage in reasoned discourse, reasoned argument. That's step one. If we don't educate ourselves, then how can we be meaningful participants in the public debate? Secondly, make one's views known. For example, if there is a liberty-threatening measure underway, then the listeners should in fact write their member of Congress, their member of the United States Senate, however you want to write. Let them hear, let them know. Silence betokens in the culture acquiescence, right? Oh, well, I'm afraid to speak up. Well, okay. If you're afraid to speak up, then bad things may happen, right? Remember from World War II and the term thing, first they came for the Saturday people, right? And then they came for the disabled, and now they're coming for me. And I didn't speak up. So we do have to have the courage of our convictions. And the final thing I will say, speaking up to our leaders and so forth, is to say, I'm going to engage in what they call in business school collective action. I want to be in community with others, as opposed to just my writing an email or a letter or what have you. I want to be in community together and to express ourselves vocally. And to be honest, I think in the Christian world, the evangelical world, many pastors have been afraid to speak up on some of these issues. And bad things can happen when they do. I talk about one situation involving a wonderful church, Church of the Highlands in Birmingham, Alabama, where the pastor speaks in his private capacity, and the city of Birmingham comes down with a sledgehammer on him, even though it's perfectly appropriate, lawful, and so forth, in good taste and service. So we then have to be prepared to pay the price of exclusion, of some form of mild, it's mild in our country, persecution.
Hey, I have to ask you on that note, and this is probably politically incorrect, but it won't be the first time. Why is it that pastors of predominantly white congregations are afraid to speak up, whereas pastors of black congregations aren't? And I see it all the time, and I see it in the churches that my family is connected with. There's a certain amount of fear that if they cross the line, the IRS is coming after them, and all this other stuff. Whereas you see pulpits in black churches used for many reasons, and you see political figures at the pulpit. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm going to get hate mail over that statement, but hey, I got to call it the way I see it.
Well, and I think that we need to be willing to stand up and we see threats. And I think the simple answer, and I'm not going to put this in racial terms, I'm just saying if a pastor sees fit not to speak up, it's undoubtedly because that pastor is in his or her comfort zone, right? I'm comfortable. And I don't want to get out of the comfort zone. And you just mentioned, you get out of the comfort zone and bad things may happen. So I think having a frank conversation with the elders or the board of deacons, however the governance structure is in an evangelical church and a congregational governance, have a conversation would be my advice. This is what's on my heart. And I'm being led to do a two-part series on Christians and culture, right? And so, and then use examples of people in the past who have been willing to step into danger And one of my favorite examples, not the only one, is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right, who was safely here in the United States during the Nazi regime's teaching as a renowned theologian and scholar at Union Theological Seminary in New York, but he voluntarily returned to Nazi Germany to help in the effort of the confessing church, of speaking out against the Nazi regime before many of the horrors were known. But he knew that this approach was just wrong and antithetical to what Western civilization, much less Christian civilization, stood for. He spoke out. And I would say it's time to be courageous, but do it collaboratively so that you're not, as the old saying goes, ahead of your skis, and you don't have the moral support
right.
of I'm using elders and deacons, but it may also be people not holding any office within the congregation, but who are wise people. Have a small group, have a focus group, right, to talk it through, as opposed to, boom, here's my sermon to be pagan just for a moment, full blown from the head of Zeus.
Well, Jesus was certainly didn't stay in the comfort zone. So if we're going to be more like him, there's a blueprint.
Yeah, there's something called cleansing the temple, among other things.
Exactly. This has been fantastic. I could go on for another hour with you, but I know you got to get going. But I encourage our listeners to absolutely pick up your book. It's called Religious Liberty in Crisis: Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. And this has been great. I really appreciate you writing this book. It is really a step-by-step guide. It really helps us better understand what we can do to protect our religious freedom, and also just how to kind of get through this crazy cancel culture phenomenon that we're going through. At least it gives us some tools.
I hope so. And I hope that even if you get it from the library, that's if the book isn't burned. I was just in Portland, Oregon. So, and I looked around, are they burning my book yet? And they said, well, it hasn't quite been published yet. But
I'm surprised your publicist hasn't organized that. That's a great idea, by the way.
Yeah, we're gonna burn this book. Yeah, but if we got just another thing on cancel culture, by its very definition, that is inimical to human liberty, including the freedom of speech. And happily, increasingly, thoughtful folks on the left are speaking out against the cancel culture. Let's have a marketplace of ideas and treat individuals with civility in the marketplace. Hear what they have to say, agree or disagree, but you don't say, I disagree with what you have to say, and therefore I hereby ban your book.
Oh, I love that.
Ban your speech.
I love that. I love what you just said. Let's start the idea culture as opposed to the cancel culture. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, let's have a conversation culture. A respectful conversation culture instead of yelling at one another.
Hey, listen, once again, thank you very much. I can't wait to get this out there, and I can't wait to share this with my daughter. I know she's going to be tickled to death, and I wish you a great, safe 2021, 2022, and beyond. Let's make this the real roaring 20s. We need it after what we've just gone through.
I like that. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Ken. There you have it, Ken Starr. Wow. Wasn't he something? He was so much fun. I had no idea that I was going to have that much fun with him. You know, they tell me Ken Starr, and of course he's an attorney, former judge, et cetera, and I think, wow, you know, that's cool. That's cool. I'm gonna talk to a guy that was behind the Clinton impeachment and the guy that defended Trump, and I thought that's pretty cool. But I had no idea it was going to be that much fun, and he was a hoot. So make sure that you pick up his book, Religious Liberty in Crisis: Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. It's available wherever you get your books. And of course, we all know that that's Amazon.com. I'm David Sams. This has been CIA, Contagious Influencers of America. Be sure to check out our radio show website at keepthefaith.com. There you can listen to past episodes and find all kinds of goodies. And also, I encourage you to check out our podcast website. and that's at contagiousInfluencers.com. Be sure to rate and review and share our podcast because that's how others find out about us, okay? I would really, really appreciate it. That's it for this episode. We'll be back in a few days with another exciting episode. And gosh, all I can tell you is summer is here. Go live it up and go out to a restaurant, support your local businesses, and let's get back into the swing of things and make sure you reach out and help those who are having a difficult time recovering from all of this. And that's millions of folks all across the country. If nothing else, invite them over to dinner and tell them you love them. I'm sure that would mean a lot. So until next time, David Sams here. Remember, go out there and live that life and live in color because it sure is a heck of a lot more interesting than living in black and white. Bye-bye.